I've been getting this question a few times over the last couple days about how Brewmaster feels in high keys on the PTR for Season 3, and in this video, I'm going to do a little bit of just ranting, talking about it kind of off the cuff. I've been able to test both Shado-pan and Master of Harmony up to 15, 16 keys, so I think I have a pretty good idea. Now, I've seen Brewmasters go much higher. I've seen some obviously very good tank players pick up Brew. Now, I know there's a lot of good tank players that don't necessarily enjoy Brewmaster or are that practiced at it, so it's kind of hard to tell if you're watching someone like Yoda. Yoda's obviously a very good player, but he himself has admitted that he's not that comfortable on Brew. His specialty really lies in like the VDH, the protection paladin, maybe the prot warrior as well. So I'm hoping that any insight I have here is valuable to both novice Brewmaster players as well as people at the higher end. First things first, testing is just about wrapping up for this first week. We were able to test Ecodome Akali, or Aldani. There we go. Akali. Dungeon's very good. 3-boss dungeon, fairly short. Lots of physical damage, which means that things like Protection Warrior is very busted. Brewmaster also feels very good. There's a few instances where you're going to be taking several melees at the same time. And there's a couple of tank buster, like, magical damages on these sentinels. So you do want to be a little careful here. But for the most part, Brew feels very, very, very tanky. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Now, the build that I was preferring to run, or that I had my most success with, actually was not Shado-pan, but it was Master of Harmony. And while Master of Harmony damage will generally be a little bit more flatlined, I find that it's a little bit more consistent in terms of the damage profile, as well as its overall tankiness from boss to boss. Its single target is just as good as its AoE, but I want to talk about the build that I was playing. So specifically, I was playing this build here that you see. Ignore the class tree. I kind of go back and forth on what talents that I like to run, but the spec tree is quite interesting. Now, of course, you are probably noticing that I'm not running any capstones. That is actually intended. The capstones are kind of bad. Now, the trinket that I was actually running was kind of built around this Eraz Ritual Forge. Now, this is a trinket that's going to come from the 4th boss of the raid. He is going to drop, I don't know why the loot's not loading. He's going to drop this trinket here. It gives base crit strike, so upwards of 2,000 crits, which is a good stat for Brew. And when you use it for 30 seconds, which, by the way, is the length of Weapons of Order, you gain a massive burst of agility. And this agility is amazing. So right now you're saying that I'm at 51% stagger at 700 item level. When I pop this, my agility is going to shoot it to 122k. My base stagger without shuffle being active is 62%, which is going to put you right at that kind of like hard wall around that 84-85% stagger effectiveness mark, which means you're going to be very tanky during the duration of this cooldown. And the start of your CD is going to be very bursty, with things like Keg Smash, with things like Rising Sun Kick and Overwhelming Force, on top of the fact that you also have things like Chi Burst and Exploding Keg. So when you kind of tile these things together, every 30 seconds or so, you're extremely tanky and you do a ton of damage. So it feels really good. Now, your highs aren't going to be as high as things like Shado-pan, which I'll talk about in a bit, but you're also doing regularly fairly consistent damage. I've foregone running Zen State and Resolve because Zen State, I need to do a little bit more research on how it works exactly and the conditions where it's actually usable. This is weird because there's a lot of times in these runs where I don't even really drop below 40% health, 50% health. Even sometimes I'm just sitting at like 80% with consistent absorbs on me. So Zen State feels like it might not be all that useful until you're doing like the highest end of play. And Resolve is still bugged. At the time of recording this video, which is on Tuesday, right before like the PTR reset, this does not scale up in spheres. It does scale based on your missing health, which is good. So if you're at like 10% health, it's going to heal for a lot. But because it's not stacking those orbs, the hot is actually very minuscule and not very impactful. And because of that, I've decided not to actually test Celestial Infusion this week. I don't know if Brewmasters have. I've been very busy with just real life stuff, so I haven't been able to really watch what other Brewmasters are playing with. But Celestial Infusion feels like it'll be good if you can play Resolve, but because you can't, or because it's so bugged, I just decided not to test it this week. I'm going to look at it in future weeks. So if you are wondering about it, I just have to stay tuned for it because I just decided not to test it. Now, I have a theory that it could be really, really, really impactful with like playing specifically with like a Resto Druid or a Prez Evoker or a Resto Shaman when you have a lot of triage healing. And if you're playing something like Light Brewing, or something that you guys probably may have noticed if you have a keen eye, is Anvil and Stave. I was testing a lot of Anvil and Stave. I really like how this talent actually feels currently. In previous patches, it's just like kind of like whatever. But the fact that Celestial Brew makes up a solid portion of our healing, Celestial Infusion has a 16-second uptime compared to the 8-second uptime of Celestial Brew, even though the absorb is a fifth of the amount, or I guess the amount that's being absorbed is a fifth, so you have to take 5 times the amount of damage to absorb the full shield. Anvil and Stave will have you, allowing you to have more consistent uses of this ability, especially in something like Ecodome Macaulay. I'm not sure about some of these other dungeons, but there were certain pulls in Ecodome where I was getting refreshes like crazy, and that's because of obviously Anvil and Stave. That's obviously because of things like Blackout Combo, as well as things like Facepalm. So there's a lot of cooldown reduction in your kit currently, where maybe you don't need to play late brewing, but Anvil and Stave felt really, really good. And the reason it also feels good is because you're getting your Harmonic Surge buff whenever you hit Celestial Brew, which you're incentivized to hit fairly often. There's a really nice feedback loop with Master of Harmony as well, where you do a little bit of damage, you pop Celestial Brew, now you have an Absorb. Your Absorb is now also expelling your Vitality, which is dealing damage and making them take more damage, and then your Harmonic Surge is the buff that you gain, so your next Tiger Palms are going to deal more damage as well. And once your Vitality breaks, which will happen from the Harmonic Surge, it then starts building up more Vitality. So you're building up Vitality faster and dumping it faster in this build. So the class feels very, very good to play. Now, I was trying to test with Rushing Jade Wind, which I was hoping would be a little bit more interesting than it was, but unfortunately it just kind of felt clunky. I think you're still going to play Special Delivery, though there is a world where you can play Rushing Jade Wind, but this is pretty much the build that I landed on playing with. A couple of talents that you'll notice that I'm not playing is Charred Passions. I opted to run Salsalabim Strength because of the interaction of our resource economy that it has with like I guess, energy spenders. So things like Breath of Fire, things like Blackout Kick, these are really important and work really well inside of our damage profile because they don't cost energy, allowing us to restore energy over time. Same with like things like Chi Burst and Exploding Keg. These abilities don't cost energy, so you need to fit them in. Now, if you run Breath by itself and opt out of this, or maybe go Scalding Brew, or maybe you want to play like Tranquil Spirit or Zen State, or even Resolve in a working state, the problem is that Breath of Fire has such a long cooldown that it actually kind of disrupts the flow of your natural economy, and I'm going to find it very hard to think that we're going to play without this in the next patch. The Mighty Stompcast here, unfortunately, just doesn't feel great in Mythic Plus, if I'm being honest, because Nizao somewhat has a mind of its own. You'll probably want to macro Pet Attack into some of your abilities, so when you summon him, he's on your target, but then you're kind of micromanaging his positioning with like where you want to knock. Like, for example, I've had times where I used him and he would maybe be out like on the far side of maybe a caster that was a little bit out of the group because it hadn't come in all the way. And when I went to do a knock-up, it only hit the one mob up into the air and not everything that I wanted to interrupt. So there's like some awkwardness with the Mighty Stomp. I wish it was just around us. Like, I wish like we invoked Nizao out of our character and we knocked things up in a certain radius. I think that would work better. Having it based around your pet's positioning is just super clunky. Unless you're going to use like a pet move macro or a pet attack macro to make sure it's attacking the right thing, which I think is just too much fucking work to utilize. Because of our main stat, the bottom left-hand corner is kind of useless. Like Ox Stance, Heightened Guard, and Black Ox Adept never really worked. These were both good in Season 2, in Season 1 and 2. In Season 2, Ox Stance was good in some instances, and now with the new updated Zen State, I have to do testing on it, like I said, but I would imagine that you could always just opt for something like Zen State instead of spending a point on Ox Stance, so you can spend the rest of these points down in like the lower portion of your tree. Now, one other thing I'm not running is Call to Arms. Call to Arms makes this really tanky with Weapons of Order, so there's a world where you could like forego High Tolerance and you run Call to Arms. I just didn't play with it because I just think Nizao's kind of like mid. You already have him on a 2-minute cooldown, so I didn't need more uptime, but probably a fine option. I saw some people comment in a previous video that I failed to mention that this is strong, and people think it is going to be now. I've always liked Call to Arms. My issue before is that he would always die. Now you can actually heal him by purifying, so he is going to be good, but I just decided to go more of a like cooldown, a Celestial Brew cooldown reduction kind of thing through Anvil and Stave, and then things like High Tolerance and just what we used to run to just be tanky. And so what I like about Master of Harmony is your damage is extremely static, and on top of that, you're extremely tanky. Like, you're getting a ton of cooldown reduction. You're pretty solid inside of weapons. You obviously have a ton of different talents, from like Dampen to Fortifying Brew to Nizao now, since we're running him, as well as trinkets. So overall, I think Master of Harmony is going to be better. I enjoyed playing it a little bit more than I did Shado-pan, and I guess that's a good transition to talk about Shado-pan. So the issue that I'm having with Shado-pan currently is that it's kind of putting all of its eggs in one basket. Actually, right before recording this video, I tried running a 16. We ran it back twice. We wiped on the first pull twice because of aggro issues, and someone called me a trash tank. I'm going to let it go. Like, I'm not going to bitch too much about it. But DPS tends to scale much better in terms of like stats, like main set and secondary sets with DPS than it does with tanks. And so when you go into a dungeon, and not only are the mobs that I'm trying to pull extremely spread out, but they also have this weird tendency to like jump at random targets, meaning that they're not getting hit by my keg smash, which is kind of the only way that I can get threat. Obviously, your DPS are going to rip, which is frustrating. With like Master of Harmony, you have your Vitality that's spreading around. You have things like Chi Burst. Your Overwhelming Force is hitting things, which generally hits harder than Spinning Crane Kick, for example. So you have better snap threat, where then when you have a DH who's funneling one target that you like aren't able to do a lot of damage to right off the rip, there's a problem because you want everything to be stacked up before you start dealing a lot of damage. The problem that I have with Shado-pan right now is that it's, like I said, it's putting all of its eggs in one basket. Therefore, it's doing its damage. It's like extremely bursty inside of the weapons order cooldown, because that's what the tier set is revolving around. But when you don't have that active, you're kind of hitting like a wet noodle. You're not proccing flurry strikes, which is the whole kind of point of your tier set. And because we've lost our tier sets from previous seasons, obviously, and trinkets and stuff, our damage tends to be a little bit, just a little bit more, it has like these peaks and valleys. And so your keg smash isn't hitting crazy hard, your blackout kick isn't hitting crazy hard, because we used to have procs from our tier set back in the day. Keg smash used to hit harder from season 1, but that's been removed. I think Blizzard needs to evaluate this tier set. I like playing with it, and when the key goes smoothly, so I ended up going into a 12 right after this, and I'll probably show this footage on screen here, but you have these crazy highs. I'm doing like near 10 mil bursts whenever this happens, especially if you get lucky with like Shado-pan procs, like Wisdom of the Wall buffs. You're getting like shadow damage, you're getting crit, you're getting the verse, and it's all kind of lining up into this big old pot of damage. This feels really good, but when you don't have these up, you just kind of like feel like threat's an issue. Now, I generally play with rogues and phys comps and like hunters and stuff that have tricks, but when you're on PTR and depending on the comps, like sometimes you don't have that. So what I think Blizzard needs to do is, while the set's very fun with like things like Chi Surge and Call to Arms and playing like this kind of build, and you can opt to go like high tolerance here, you can grab like Charred Passions, like this might help out with threat a little bit, but what they need to do is they need to give us Keg Smash damage back. They need to buff Keg Smash at like a baseline value to do like 10%, 15% more damage. And they need to nerf the tier set. Now, I don't know how they can nerf the tier set outside of maybe just making Flurry Strikes deal 15% more damage. Or maybe like instead of being every 120 energy, it should be every 150 energy or something. Because right now, I think its damage is really good. But just because a class has good damage doesn't mean it's necessarily strong, because threat still exists. Obviously, when you're outside of cooldowns, like that's a big issue. So you're in weapons of order for 20% of the key and 30% of the key. So those times where you're not in it, it's a little bit more stressful. I will say I felt a little bit sturdier playing Master of Harmony, but both hero counts feel absolutely fine. I think the strength of our tree really lies in this kind of middle, like the transition between tier 2 and 3 tier of the tree. Pretense is really strong. I think Anvil in its current state is also really strong. Nothing changed about Anvil, but because they shifted around the point allocation, it feels like you can actually play more down here. You don't really need to play Ox Dance anymore. So again, like Anvil feels strong. So overall, I hate advocating for a nerf, but I just think when you are playing something like Shado-pan, you're going to just feel worse outside of CDs. And I feel like I keep harping on this, but I like can't stress it enough that when you aren't in the weapons of order window, it's just like, okay, like this feels terrible. So yeah, looking forward to future weeks. I'm hoping to test more things like Zen State to kind of figure out exactly what instances this would actually be playable in. Also, I'm hoping they fix Resolve, and once they fix Resolve, then I think Celestial Infusion will be able to be tested in a little bit more of a serious capacity. Those are kind of the big things I'm looking for in future weeks, as well as just how it fares like in other dungeons. Now, I will say this, Ecodome Macaulay, I think the way that the polls are laid out, I think the boss fights, they're kind of designed, like Brewmaster does really well on them. I would say the only thing that's a little scary is the second boss. His Tank Buster does a lot of damage, a lot of arcane damage up front, and it applies a bleed. And so that ability might feel kind of like terrible, but outside of that, Brew is looking really good. So I hope you guys enjoyed this kind of breakdown and how it's doing. I would say it's, again, doing really well. I'm just eager to test some stuff that's still currently bugged. Anyways, let me know if you have any questions or comments down below, and I will catch you all in the next one. Peace.